Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be cracking open Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But we're going beyond just your typical mad scientist stuff and really like digging into the characters, the big ideas, and you know how it still like resonates with us all these years later, centuries later.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Frankenstein isn't just a horror story. You know, it really grapples with these big questions about ambition and responsibility and what does it even mean to be human.
Exactly.
It's the kind of book that really stays with you long after you've finished reading it.
Absolutely. And it's all kicks off in a pretty unexpected place, the Arctic.
Right.
We have this explorer, Robert Walton, writing these letters about encountering, well, let's just say a very unusual fellow.
Yeah, that choice of setting the Arctic, I think, is so deliberate, right? It immediately establishes this sense of isolation, this pursuit of the unknown that both Walton and Victor Frankenstein share.
Right.
It's like their ambitions mirror each other in a way.
Okay, so let's dive into Victor's story then.
Yeah.
We see him as this brilliant, passionate student, totally absorbed in his studies at Ingolstadt.
Yeah.
But there's this like darkness to his ambition, this drive to unlock the secrets of life itself.
Yeah.
It's not just curiosity, is it?
No, it's almost like an obsession.
Yeah.
Victor really wants to control the very forces of creation.
Right.
He even compares himself to a god at one point.
Oh, wow.
Which, as you might guess, doesn't end well for him.
Right, right.
Yeah.
This brings us to the creation of the monster.
Yes.
Shelley describes it so vividly, this mix of scientific process and almost alchemical mystery.
Yeah.
But then Victor's reaction, it's not what you'd expect.
No, he's horrified.
Right.
He immediately rejects this being he's brought to life.
Yeah.
Abandons it, basically, to fend for itself.
Right.
And it's this profound act of, I think, parental failure that sets the whole tragedy in motion.
And that rejection is really key to understanding the monster's journey.
Yes.
Because initially, he's not the rampaging brute we often see, in adaptations.
Right.
He's actually quite well human.
Yeah. He craves connection knowledge.
Yeah.
He observes this family, the de Lacys, and he learns about language.
Right.
Emotions, even compassion.
Wow.
It's really heartbreaking because you see his potential for goodness.
Right. But of course, things go terribly wrong.
They do. Yeah.
He's driven away, rejected by those he tries to connect with.
Yeah.
This cycle of rejection just keeps repeating.
Right.
And that's when the violence starts.
Yeah, and this is where I think Frankenstein goes beyond a simple monster story.
Right.
It's asking us what creates a monster. Yeah. Is it inherent nature, or is it the cruelty inflicted by others?
So we've got these themes of isolation, rejection, the question of what makes someone truly monstrous.
Right.
How about the good versus evil thing? Does the book take sides?
It's much more nuanced than that, I think.
Okay.
The monster commits terrible acts, but he was shaped by terrible experiences. Victor's initially portrayed sympathetically, but his actions have devastating consequences.
Of course.
So it's not about picking sides, it's about understanding the complexities.
It's like Shelley is holding up a mirror to human nature itself.
Yeah.
We all have the capacity for both darkness and light, right?
Absolutely.
And the choices we make determine which side wins out.
And those choices, especially when it comes to creation, come with enormous responsibility.
Yeah.
Victor's abandonment of his creation, I think, is a direct parallel to the way society often neglects or rejects those who are different, those we deem monstrous.
It's almost like a cautionary tale about scientific advancement without ethical consideration.
Exactly.
You can't just create something powerful and wash your hands of the consequences.
Precisely, and that's where that Promethean element comes in.
Right.
Remember, the book's full title is Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus.
Oh, right.
In Greek myth, Prometheus steals fire from the gods and is punished for it.
So is Victor being punished for his ambition, his attempt to seize the power of creation?
It's definitely a layer to consider.
Yeah.
But the punishment isn't simple. It's not just physical suffering.
Right.
It's the psychological torment.
Oh, wow.
The guilt.
Yeah.
The knowledge that his actions have unleashed this chain of tragedy that he can't control.
And that tragedy really unfolds throughout the story.
It does.
It's not just Victor who suffers.
No.
We see the deaths of his younger brother, William.
Right.
Justine, who is falsely accused.
Right.
His friend, Clerval. It's like this ripple effect of pain.
The cyclical nature of violence is so central to the story.
Right.
One act of cruelty begets another, and everyone gets caught in the whirlwind, even Victor's love Elizabeth.
Right.
Her fate is tied to the monster's vengeance.
Her death is such a gut punch.
It is.
It's the culmination of everything that's gone wrong.
Right.
The destruction of beauty and innocence in this relentless pursuit of revenge.
And it highlights how Victor's attempt to play God backfires so spectacularly.
Right.
He thought he was creating life, but he's actually unleashing death and destruction.
On everyone around him.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly bleak picture.
We do.
Ambition gone wrong.
Yeah.
A cycle of violence.
Yeah.
The creator haunted by his creation. Where do we go from here? Because the story doesn't end with Victor's death, does it?
Not quite.
Okay.
Remember Robert Walton, the explorer from the beginning?
Right.
His narrative frames the entire story.
Okay.
And he's watching Victor's downfall with growing unease.
Because he sees himself in Victor, right?
Exactly.
The same drive, that ambition to achieve something extraordinary, even if it means risking everything.
So the story becomes a cautionary tale, not just for Victor, but for Walton, and by extension for all of us.
Like as Shelley is asking us, what are the limits of our ambition?
Yeah.
What are we willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of knowledge or glory? And perhaps most importantly, what are the consequences of our choices?
And that's where the real power of Frankenstein lies, I think.
Yeah.
It's not just a gothic horror story. You know, it's a mirror reflecting our own desires.
Right.
Our own potential for both greatness and destruction.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground: ambition, isolation, the nature of good and evil, the consequences of unchecked scientific pursuit. But the story continues.
It does.
And we still need to dive deeper into the characters, the themes, and the profound questions Frankenstein raises.
Absolutely.
And we will. But before we do, let's take a moment to consider what resonates most with you so far.
Yeah.
What stood out?
Right.
What connections are you making to your own life and the world around us?
Yeah, think about that.
We'll come back to those questions as we continue our deep dive.
We will. So picking up where we left off, the interesting thing about Frankenstein is it doesn't just present these big sweeping themes.
Right.
It embodies them in the characters themselves.
You're right. We've talked about Victor's ambition. But what about the monster? He's often portrayed as this one-dimensional, figure of terror.
Right.
But the book paints a much more complex picture.
Absolutely. Remember that scene where he's hiding and observing the DeLacy family?
Right.
He's not just lurking, he's learning.
Yeah.
He develops this yearning for connection.
Right.
For knowledge, and even demonstrates a capacity for empathy.
Wow.
That's really quite remarkable.
It's almost like he's a blank slate at first.
Yeah.
Right? Shaped by the experiences he has.
Right.
And those experiences are largely defined by rejection and fear.
Yeah.
Which is what fuels his rage and violence.
That's the tragedy of it all. He could have gone down a very different path if he had been met with compassion and understanding instead of horror and disgust.
That makes me think about how we often label people or things as monstrous, based on appearances or preconceived notions.
Yeah.
Frankenstein really challenges us to look beyond those surface judgments.
Absolutely.
And consider the deeper forces at play.
It's a powerful message, especially considering the historical context.
Right.
The Romantic era was grappling with these rapid advancements of science in the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
There was this sense of awe, but also anxiety about the potential consequences of human ingenuity.
So Frankenstein becomes this cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Right.
And the unintended consequences of our creations.
Exactly.
Whether those creations are literal or metaphorical.
Precisely, the novel doesn't offer easy answers.
Right.
But it forces us to confront those uncomfortable questions about the limits of human power and the responsibility that comes with knowledge.
And speaking of responsibility,
Yeah.
one of the most striking things about Victor is his constant attempts to evade it.
Right.
He creates this being, then abandons it, then spends the rest of his life trying to destroy it.
Right.
It's almost like he can't face the consequences of his own actions.
It's this refusal to acknowledge the weight of his choices that ultimately destroys him. He's consumed by guilt, by paranoia, by this constant fear of retribution. He becomes a prisoner of his own creation, both literally and figuratively.
It's like the monster is a manifestation of Victor's own inner demons.
Yeah.
The dark side of his ambition and his inability to control the forces he's unleashed.
And that brings us back to that cyclical nature of violence we talked about earlier. Victor's rejection of the monster fuels the monster's rage, which then leads to more violence, and the cycle continues.
It's a grim reflection of how easily hatred and revenge can take root and spread.
It is, and it's interesting that you mentioned that cyclical nature of violence.
Yeah.
Because even though the story is set in the past, it feels so relevant to the world today.
It does.
Think about the conflicts we see playing out on a global scale.
Yeah.
The way one act of aggression seems to inevitably lead to another.
It's like Mary Shelley tapped into something fundamental about human nature.
Yeah.
This tendency to respond to fear and pain with more fear and pain.
Yeah. Right. But the story also suggests that there's another way.
Okay.
A path that leads away from that destructive cycle.
And what is that path?
Empathy.
Okay.
Understanding, choosing compassion over revenge.
Okay.
The monster, despite all the horrors he inflicts, is still capable of feeling remorse, of recognizing the weight of his actions.
Yeah.
It's a glimmer of hope, I think, in an otherwise very bleak narrative.
That's such a powerful point.
Yeah.
It suggests that even in the face of immense suffering, even when we've been deeply wronged, we still have the capacity to choose a different path.
Exactly. And that choice is often the hardest one to make.
Right.
Especially when we're blinded by anger or grief.
Sure.
But Frankenstein reminds us that it's a choice worth making.
Yeah.
That the alternative is a spiral of destruction that ultimately consumes everyone involved.
It's like the book is saying that we all have a monster lurking within us.
Yeah.
But we also have the power to choose whether we let that monster control us.
Right.
Or whether we find a way to tame it.
Yeah.
To channel its energy into something more constructive.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that duality within ourselves, the capacity for both good and evil, and the choices we make, the actions we take, ultimately determine which side wins out.
You know, we've been focusing a lot on the darker aspects of the story.
Yeah.
But there's also a certain beauty to Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
Mary Shelley's writing is so evocative.
Yeah.
The way she describes the natural world.
Yes.
The emotions of the characters. The sublime horror of it all.
Absolutely. The descriptions of the Swiss Alps, the icy wastelands of the Arctic, they're breathtaking.
Yeah.
And even the monster, as terrifying as he can be, is described with a certain tragic grandeur.
Yeah.
There's a kind of poetry to his suffering, to his yearning for connection and understanding.
It's almost like she's suggesting that even in the midst of darkness, even in the face of our own self-inflicted horrors, there's still beauty to be found in the world.
That's a really insightful observation, and it connects back to that romantic sensibility that permeates the book.
Right.
The Romantics were fascinated by the power of nature.
Right.
By the sublime, by the beauty that can be found in both joy and sorrow.
And that duality is reflected in the characters themselves.
It is.
Victor is both brilliant and reckless.
Yeah.
The monster is both terrifying and pitiful.
Right.
They're complex figures who defy easy categorization.
And I think that's what makes Frankenstein such an enduring work of literature.
Right.
It's not just a horror story.
Yeah.
It's a profound meditation on the complexities of human nature, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the desperate need for empathy and compassion in a world that often seems to lack both.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it.
It does.
You keep coming back to those big questions. Those unsettling truths about ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. And that's the mark of a truly great work of art. It doesn't offer easy answers, but it sparks conversations. It challenges our assumptions. It forces us to confront the shadows within ourselves and the society we've created.
Speaking of confronting shadows, I want to delve a little deeper into the female characters in the book.
Okay.
They often seem to play secondary roles.
They do.
But they're still crucial to understanding the story's dynamics, aren't they?
Absolutely. Elizabeth in particular is a fascinating figure. She's Victor's cousin, his adopted sister, and eventually his fiancée.
Right.
She represents this ideal of feminine virtue, beautiful, compassionate, devoted. But she's also a victim of circumstance. Caught in the crossfire of Victor and the monster's conflict.
She's often seen as a passive character. A damsel in distress. But there's also a quiet strength to her.
There is.
She endures Victor's neglect, his emotional distance, his obsession with his work.
Yeah.
Yet she remains a source of love and support for him.
That's an important point. Elizabeth is not simply a passive victim.
Right.
She embodies a kind of resilience, a capacity for love and forgiveness that contrasts sharply with the destructive forces unleashed by Victor and the monster.
And her death is one of the most heartbreaking moments in the story.
It is.
It's the culmination of the monster's vengeance.
Right.
But it also represents the destruction of innocence, of beauty, of all that Victor holds dear.
Exactly. Her death is a turning point in the narrative.
Right.
It marks the point of no return for both Victor and the monster, pushing them further down the path of self-destruction.
It's like the monster isn't just trying to destroy Victor physically. He's trying to destroy everything that gives Victor's life meaning.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he's perpetuating that cycle of violence, that legacy of pain and loss that seems to define their relationship.
It's a reminder that violence begets violence. That revenge rarely brings true satisfaction. And that the innocent often pay the price for the sins of the guilty.
It's a sobering thought. And it makes me think about the ways in which we often perpetuate cycles of harm without even realizing it.
Right.
The prejudices we hold, the systems we support, the choices we make.
Yeah.
They all have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves.
That's a profound insight, and it connects back to one of the central themes of Frankenstein, responsibility.
Right.
Victor tries to evade responsibility for his creation, but he can't escape the consequences of his actions.
And those consequences aren't limited to his own life.
No, they're not.
They ripple outward, impacting the lives of everyone around him, especially the women, who are often relegated to the sidelines of the story.
That's an important point to consider. How does the story change when we shift our focus away from Victor and the monster and consider the experiences of the female characters? What do their stories tell us about the broader themes of creation, responsibility, and the consequences of unchecked ambition?
Those are questions worth pondering as we continue to unpack the layers of meaning within Frankenstein.
They are.
We've talked about the characters, the themes, the historical context. But there's still so much to explore.
There's
so many insights to uncover.
Absolutely.
And we'll do just that when we return for the final part of our deep dive.
We will.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Frankenstein. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
I mean, we've been dissecting this story, like peeling back all the layers of these characters and like the ideas that Shelley is wrestling with. It's not just a monster story, is it?
Definitely not. You know, we've talked about Victor's ambition,
the
monster's yearning for connection, the cyclical nature of violence, but there's also this thread of beauty running through it all.
You're right. Even in the darkest moments, Shelley's writing is so vivid, almost poetic.
It is.
The way she describes the natural world, the intensity of the characters' emotions. It's haunting.
It is.
But also strangely beautiful.
That's the power of romanticism, I think. Finding the sublime in both the awe-inspiring and the terrifying. Think about those landscapes. The vastness of the Arctic, the towering Alps. They reflect the scope of Victor's ambition, but also the immense forces he's trying to control.
It's like nature itself is a character in this story.
It is.
Both a source of wonder and a reminder of the limits of human power.
Exactly, and that duality is reflected in the characters themselves. Victor, brilliant but reckless. The monster capable of both cruelty and tenderness. Even Elizabeth, who represents this ideal of feminine virtue, is ultimately a victim of the chaos unleashed by Victor's actions.
Her death is such a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
It's not just a personal tragedy. It's like the death of hope itself.
It is.
This destruction of beauty and innocence amidst this cycle of vengeance.
It really drives home the point that actions have consequences. And those consequences often extend far beyond what we intend or can even imagine.
Right.
Victor's pursuit of knowledge, his desire to create life, ultimately leads to a trail of death and destruction.
And he spends the rest of his life trying to outrun that responsibility, to destroy the very being he brought into existence.
Right.
But the monster is more than just a physical creature, isn't he?
He's a reflection of Victor's own inner darkness.
Right.
The shadow side of his ambition and his refusal to acknowledge the weight of his choices.
It's like the monster is a manifestation of all the things Victor tries to repress or deny.
Yeah.
His pride, his hubris, his fear of the unknown.
And that's what makes their relationship so compelling.
Yeah.
They're two sides of the same coin, inextricably linked in this dance of creation and destruction.
But isn't there also a sense that the monster yearns for more than just destruction?
Definitely.
He craves connection, understanding, even love.
Absolutely. Think about his interactions with the DeLacy family.
Right.
He's drawn to their kindness, their compassion. Yeah. For a brief moment, it seems like he might find a place of belonging.
Yeah.
A chance to break free from the cycle of rejection and violence that has defined his existence.
Of course, that hope is shattered.
It is.
He's driven away, once again reminded of his otherness, his monstrousness.
Right.
And that's when the rage truly takes over.
It's heartbreaking because it reinforces the idea that monsters are often made, not born.
Right.
They're the product of fear, isolation, the cruelty inflicted by others.
And that brings us back to one of the most challenging questions the book raises.
Yeah.
What is our responsibility to those we deem monstrous?
It's a great question.
How do we respond to difference to those who challenge our preconceived notions of what it means to be human?
It's a question that resonates deeply with our own time, doesn't it?
It does.
We live in a world where fear and division often seem to be the dominant forces.
Yeah.
It's easy to otherize, to demonize those who are different from us.
Right. But Frankenstein reminds us that those choices have consequences.
They do.
When we reject compassion, when we embrace fear and hatred, we risk creating the very monsters we fear.
It's a powerful warning and one that's worth heeding.
Yeah.
The story doesn't offer easy solutions,
Right.
but it forces us to confront our own biases, our own capacity for cruelty, and to consider the possibility of a different path, one based on empathy and understanding.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Frankenstein,
Yeah.
I keep coming back to this idea of responsibility.
Yeah.
Victor's responsibility for his creation.
Right.
But also our responsibility as readers, as humans, to grapple with the complex questions the story raises.
It's not enough to simply read Frankenstein as a horror story or a cautionary tale.
Right.
We have to engage with its deeper meanings.
Yeah.
Its challenges to our assumptions about good and evil, about creation and destruction,
Right.
about what it means to be human in a world where those lines are constantly being blurred.
It's a story that asks us to confront our own inner monsters, to acknowledge the shadows within ourselves and the society we've created. But it also offers a glimmer of hope.
It does.
A suggestion that even in the darkest of times, empathy, compassion, and understanding can be the sparks that ignite a different kind of future.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of Frankenstein.
Yes. Thank you all for listening.
We hope it sparked some thought-provoking conversations and perhaps even inspired you to revisit this timeless masterpiece.
Absolutely.
And as always, we encourage you to continue the exploration on your own.
Yes.
What resonates with you?
Right.
What questions linger?
Yeah.
Keep diving deep.